Hello, Brian. Thank you for joining us today and being willing to share your story.
No problem.
How long have you been out of this group?
I was officially, it's been about 7 years. So I came out in 2013, and I was in for between 4 to 5 years, being baptized in 2009.
Cool. Well, I'm definitely excited to get into your story. A lot of what we'll say, Brian, I think is important because the WMSCOG has a record of suing and attacking people who speak out against them. And so I want us to be careful to make sure that everything we're going to say in this video that is negative toward the WMSCOG, it's our opinions. We're going to share our opinions about what the evidence that we see about this group and what we think they are. So I'm saying that to protect us both because as far as I know, they can't attack us for sharing our opinions. So Brian, why don't you just tell us about how you first came to be in this group? Where were you at in life, and what was it that drew you to this group in the first place?
Well, the year was about 2009. I was in college at the time. And I guess at the time I was at this particular time in my life, I was kind of, I guess how you would say, lost, apathetic, kind of, didn't know what I was doing or what exactly I wanted to pursue. And like a lot of other members, former members, I should say, where people get recruited, I was just kind of drifting along, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Also, so it was at this time, 2009, one particular day, I was just kind of, I remember I was at school in the library when what was, unbeknownst to me at the time, the missionary of that particular Zion came and preached to me. Or not really preach, but you know how they do, show a couple Bible verses and draw them out of context and string their message together with it. And so from that time on, for about twice a week for the next month or two, I'd say, I met with that individual and studied, with sarcastic quotation marks, the prophecies, so to speak, and really, I mean, at that time, reflecting on myself, I really knew nothing about nothing, and so of course it was amazing at that time, and
it probably seemed really profound and deep because you're saying you didn't really you didn't have a groundwork of what the Bible really taught at that point.
Right. Yeah. Especially what's amazing is how they're able to, make something seem like a prophecy and tie it to things that actually happened. Like, I'm sure you're familiar with their Seal of God study and such and so forth, where they talk about World War II and Adam bomb. But yeah, so I guess after a few weeks of studying, I got baptized. However, here's one thing that, looking back on it, should have and would have been a red flag had I known what I know now, would have been the fact that when they introduced themselves to me, they said, "We are students of theology. We need your help working on a project." So it kind of led me along in that, in that line of reasoning, like, okay, I'm just helping these unusually nice people with their project by listening to what they have to say. And then on the very last that last study, they just kind of hit me with the be baptized immediately study, and from then on, it's kind of like a bait and switch, as they would say in the business world, and that's kind of how I entered the WMS. So to speak.
So it sounds like you maybe could say that you experienced some of the love bombing, I think is what I think Jeremy in the last interview we did called it. They tend to really kind of go over the top in kindness and making you feel good about yourself and making you feel welcome. It sounds like maybe you're saying that was the experience, but so correct me if I'm wrong there, but also do you feel like that, if that is the case, do you feel like you experienced that love bombing? And if so, do you feel like it changed over time? Do you feel like the kindness and that attitude that you were shown initially, did that change as you were in the group longer?
Oh, well, for sure, definitely. Once I was in the group, I guess there was within the first I'd say within the first 3 to 5 months, I couldn't keep all of the requirements like the Sabbath day and the third day worship, because I had school and work and other obligations, and so that's when steadily the love bombing, or I guess the affectionate veneer that they show you initially, sometimes they don't. It's all they have to do is stop that, or
Yep.
because in a way you've kind of become. It's weird because I can't remember where I read this, but it's kind of like there's it's kind of like you become addicted to this love bombing in a way.
Interesting.
It's like it's something biochemical that happens, and it's a very, very intentional and direct form of manipulation. That that if someone love bombs you, gives you something that basically releases endorphins in your brain. All they have to do to get you to do what they want is to stop that for a time, and in a way you kind of become like a junkie on that. And it's like
that's interesting. Yeah.
It's like and then from just a superficial standpoint, the perspective becomes like, here are these people who are always so nice, always willing to bring you a cup of coffee, and always say, we love you, brother and sister. Now all of a sudden they're pissed at me because I missed a Sabbath. There must be really something wrong with me.
Yep.
And that becomes the
Wow.
internalized guilt there.
It's like the kindness and the love bombing, if we're going to continue calling it that. The kindness, though, that affection that they show you up front, that obviously any human being is going to react to that, is going to respond to that, is going to like that, being told, you're great. And we've had female members who have since left the group, but they'll talk about how, initially they would just go over the top talking about how pretty they were and how wonderful they were and special. So it's like I'm not saying there's something wrong with being nice to people or showing kindness. I think that's great. You should love people and show kindness. I think what I'm saying about this, and maybe what you're saying, is that it seems like it's not coming from a sincere place of them actually caring about you as much as it is this is part of their strategy to hook you. They hook you like this is part of their fishing line, that hook that gets caught in your mouth so that you feel that affection, so you kind of give part of your allegiance to them. And then what they do is from that kind of gives them a platform then to start implementing the other part, which is the guilt and the fear that kind of keeps you in check and keeps you in line with what they want you to do. And they've kind of already laid this foundation of kindness, showing that affection, so that then if you contradict them, if you go against the fear and the guilt and the commands or whatever it is that they try to put on you, if you go against that, the guilt then becomes focused on yourself. Like, you feel guilty because it's like, well, these people are so nice and they must be of God. They must have the truth. So how can I go against them? What kind of person am I if I, don't go along with what they say? It's just, I'm seeing here, the manipulation involved is disturbing.
Kind of a form of silent gaslighting, I would call it, to make you the point is to make you think there's something wrong with you.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
Yeah. And I just heard this last night talking to a guy who spent a lot of time studying this, but it kind of goes along with that I feel like they kind of, one of their initial things is obviously the kindness and the affection, but then from there, they almost have this secondary strategy of making you feel guilty for your very existence almost. Do you feel like you could relate to that? Do you feel like that is what you experienced, where it kind of went from the kindness and the affection to you then almost becoming guilty for even being on this planet?
Yes, definitely. However, what I connect that to is, and this is just my personal studies, I guess, is Robert Lifton's system of thought reform. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. Basically, the difference between brainwashing and let's call it brainwashing and undue influence is that is that brainwashing uses force and violence. Undue influence, as per with the WMS, uses milio control and peer pressure. They do that. However, it's it's very focused in that one of the studies they go over with you is about the forgiveness of sins and how we fell from heaven. So
yes, right.
I imagine you'd assume that's a heretical teaching, but yeah, they basically teach that the reason we exist here on earth is because this is a prison, and we're all sinners who fell from heaven. It's kind of and this is how I guess the thought reform comes in, is because we don't know in operating their paradigm what exactly we did in heaven. So it's our job, I guess we can say, while we're here, to figure that out.
Yeah.
And while we're trying to figure that out, it follows the exact same model or structure as the Chinese thought reform that Robert Lifton talks about. It's not similar. It's exactly the same.
It's exactly the same. Yeah.
They basically, for those who might be listening and don't know, Robert Lifton was an Air Force psychiatrist who basically interviewed people who were who were captured, detained, and brainwashed by the Chinese government. The interrogators would accuse them of a vague crime. They would either admit to it to get out, or in most cases deny it, and basically they would be punished every time if they denied it, and they would, in order to try to get out, they would try to make it specifically as possible, fabricate in their imaginations what exact crime they committed against the government, even though it wasn't real. And it got to the point that where through repetition, they actually believed that they committed this horrible crime against the government. And when they were in that state of repentance, they were able to
have their way with them.
And see, the WMS does the exact same thing. We're trying to when you reach that state of repentance, where you figure out your sin in heaven, that's when you can build the new identity of the gospel worker, or of being built in on or Zhang's image. But sorry, I kind
Isn't
of
that
went
crazy?
on a rant.
No, that's not a rant at all. That's incredibly helpful information, and it seems like it reconfirms what I've heard in the past about how this group, the organization, the actual foundation of it in South Korea. I need to be more studied on this, but I think it has a lot of ties and roots in military like thinking, and that sounds so much like, that's exactly what, if you go to the Marines, that's what they're going to do. They're going to break you down. They're going to get rid of your own sense of self, your own critical thinking, and to get you to become part of a group, and so, but first they have to get rid of they have to kind of wash away your own self-identity, your own who you are. They got to get rid of that. They got to have like kind of a blank slate to work with, so that then they can make you into what they want you to be. And that's how the military operates. I mean, I think that's what the Marines are going to do if you join them. They're gonna kind of follow that same pattern. And it's just interesting that seems to be so clearly what's going on here. I think it'd be worth maybe say again what the name of that guy is who had that thought, and maybe where people could, and we can put links to it in the description, but it might be helpful for people to be able to get access to what it is that you're talking about, to read it for themselves.
That's right. The book is called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. I don't know if you can see it there.
Yep,
it's by Robert J. Lifton. And yeah, it really details very well the process of like the parallels in that book are amazing, and just how the personal identity is broken down through the accusation, and then the person's personal fabrication of a crime they didn't commit, and then the new communist identity was essentially rebuilt.
Wow.
Yeah, I couldn't recommend that book enough.
And it doesn't seem far off. It doesn't seem like a huge stretch to say that a religious movement that originated from a country like South Korea would be deeply rooted in that sort of philosophy and that sort of way of thinking.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because the author not speculates, but basically his theory on how this type of deliberate influence got started. He said it was it's a combination of nationalism and the propaganda from the Russian Revolution and that type of deliberate influence. But also the key thing is the filial piety, meaning which is a huge cultural pillar in Far East countries. Filial piety meaning unconditional submission to parents or authority figures. So you can see, I mean, when I explore the WMS a bit, what I figure out is that it's basically traditional Korean animism that wears a superficial Christian veneer.
Yeah.
That
with the Bible as the costume that they kind of wear over the top of that.
Right. And the thing is, mixed with that filial piety, the unconditional submission to a parent or a shaman or elder per se. And that would, of course, be Zhang.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I think that's very helpful information that I hope the people listening, I think it would give a lot of people something to really think about. I think with that, it is worth acknowledging something that I'm continually trying to figure out how to process in my own faith is when I talk about the WMSCOG, I don't want to make it out as if this group is the only group that has errors and flaws. Within Protestant Christianity, I think sometimes you see similar patterns. I wouldn't say it's as intense as what we're talking about here, but I think I want to be objective as I continue to talk about this group that I think it's not only a problem within the WMSCOG, but in a lot of religious groups as a whole. And I think me being a Christian, I want to own that I think within Western Christianity, I think there have been large movements in a popular narrative that is based on fear. I think there's been a large push, and probably continues to be in many circles, where fear of hell is kind of the driving, almost like the underlying foundation, driving force of any gospel preaching and any message being taught. And so I just think it's worth acknowledging that there's similarities within these groups, and I think it's worth recognizing that. And I continue to be a Christian. I don't think that that by itself means that there is no truth within the Bible. My view on that is that I think people are messed up. I think people are weak and flawed, and I think people don't always accurately represent the teachings of Jesus. And I think that manifests in ways like this. But I just wanted to acknowledge, and we'll probably continue to talk about that in future videos, just that there are similarities. The WMSCOG isn't the only group guilty of this sort of behavior, and I think that's as a Christian and within the Christian community, I think this is an area where we need to figure out, how do we not look like the WMSCOG? How do we not deal with these kind of issues, with issues of fear? And when we talk about sin and doctrines about sin and the sin of humanity, to not do it in such a way that we're no different than the way groups like the WMSCOG are doing it. And so that's probably a topic for another day, but maybe just saying that here to kind of begin that conversation is something I want to kind of continue to think about and acknowledge in videos as we go forward. So,
well, I understand what you're saying with that. However, I would maybe disagree a little bit in that perhaps I would say that within Protestant Christianity, perhaps there are some people, but I would that do that sort of thing. But I would say the main difference is that the WMS, when they do it, it is deliberate and premeditated. When I think we could probably find a sect or a church or an isolated church that might do something like that, or have a leader that could possibly fit the profile for a cult leader. But I would say that is not most of the time is not deliberate and just gets carried away or needs rebuke or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point. Westboro Baptist Church, if you're familiar with them, it would probably be a good example of what I would feel like would be. I mean, I think that group is every bit as dangerous and off track as the WMSCOG, and they doctrinally, I think I would line up with many of their doctrinal statements and positions about theology in the Bible and what it teaches. But I think I think practically in the way they behave and function, I think it out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so I think, you see that at the core of what they are, I think it's just as dangerous, just as terrible as what's going on with this organization, the WMSCOG. And so, but I think that's, you brought up a good point. And are you familiar with Westboro? They're like a very fundamentalist Baptist sect with like 80 members, and you have to be born into one of the initial families to be able to join. And they're interesting. Yes,
that's for sure.
Yep. But all that to say, I think my conviction is that I think my understanding of what Jesus taught is I personally believe in hell. I believe in heaven. I believe there's a lot of things about those realities that we don't understand, and I'm asking a lot of questions about those things right now and what the details of what they are entail. And I got a lot to learn. I definitely don't have that figured out. I don't think anybody does. But I think Christians should be careful to, and I think you're absolutely right that I think there is a distinction there. I think the WMSCOG as an organization is more intentional with the way they utilize the fear of hell and things like that. I don't think the members themselves are as guilty as being intentionally deceptive and trying to implement fear. I think they sincerely believe it, but I think at the root of the organization, there's more intentionality about it. But I think as Christians, we have to be careful that we don't begin to, with the way we're presenting the gospel and talking about Jesus and talking about who God is, that fear of hell isn't like at the forefront. Because I see Jesus talking about fearful things and warnings, but I don't see that in the preaching of the apostles. You don't see really ever that I can think of in the book of Acts where the fear of hell is being presented as the reason why people should repent and believe. I think they speak of the coming judgment of Christ, so I think that would probably actually fit into that category. But I think overall, it's more about we should be drawn to Christianity primarily not because of fear, but because of it's just a better. My conviction is a better way because I think Jesus has a lot to offer, and peace and joy and freedom.
I would contend that you should be drawn to any worldview because you find truth in it, not necessarily because you think it's gonna, because you're gonna
the consequences.
The world's gonna end. Yeah,
right. And so it's a problem when a group like the WMSCOG so strongly relies on these fear tactics. Again, this is opinions. This is the way we see from the evidence. This is my opinion of how they operate. It seems like they utilize and use fear to manipulate members into kind of falling into line with what they want them to do and to be.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, one of the things that I've kind of this morning perused some of your previous videos, but that you touched on with Jeremy is that he mentioned that there was a time when he was in the WMS that someone close to him noticed that he really, really wasn't happy. Like they kept asking him, "Are you happy? Are you happy?" And I related to that quite a bit because there was a point in time where after all the the effects of the love bombing faded, and I was a gospel worker, so to speak, that the member is really not happy, and that literally the only reason you're still there is that you think tomorrow the world's going to end. Tomorrow, Father's going to come back, so to speak. And and that is really the thing that keeps that keeps them there. That's their defense mechanism, so to speak.
Yeah.
But,
it's kind of like that again. The analogy I see is like you have the WMSCOG. If it's this building, it's like at the door they have all these really nice greeters who are like super kind and affectionate, like we've talked about. But once they convince you with that fake perception of kindness and goodness, which again I believe is fake. I believe it's not coming from a sincere place 99% of the time. Once they get you in those doors, they shut them and lock them. And I think the doors and the locks in the WMSCOG are the fear of hell. It's like the fear that Father's coming, the world's going to end. It's like those are the locks that like you can't, they're the mental locks in your mind that like you don't have the key to open those doors up because members don't know what to do with that fear. Like, okay, you got this person telling you any day, this Korean God is going to show up and obliterate the world. And if you're not on his side and haven't fallen in line, you're going to be tormented forever and ever. And like, yeah, that's a good way to keep people inside a door.
Yeah, definitely. That's what kept me there as long as I lasted. But
yeah. Well, you mentioned something actually about Jeremy's interview that kind of leads me to the next question that I wanted to ask. And that's just about how did this group and being involved in it, how did it impact you as a person? And did it change? Do you feel like it changed who you were as a person? And was the change for better or for worse?
I would say probably a bit of both. Ever since, I guess to say the positive aspect of me coming out, I wouldn't say that anything positive is from the group itself, but that's just my opinion. But one of the positive side effects, I guess you could say, is that it really, the whole experience overall really taught me the value of critical thinking. Like,
yes.
And because when I think about solutions and problems and solutions, like when I think about high control groups like such as the WMS overall, I try to think about if there is one singular magic bullet that can end this problem. The only thing that I could come to is people having better critical thinking skills. I mean, I know I had at one point I had none, and that's what initially, but that's how I and probably lots and lots of other people were reeled into it. So when so that's a positive. However, negative. I guess I would say it's made me relatively paranoid as a person. It makes I don't trust people easily. I always tend to assume the worst intentions in people, especially nice people, because of it. It made me subconsciously kind of a bit of a doomsday nut. To be honest. So, I mean, I could elaborate on that, but
that's interesting. Yeah, no, that's a lot of that is very similar to what Jeremy just shared in that interview we just did. Just the trust issues I think that it developed, and it's I mean, because really it's a traumatic type of experience when what's happening is you have people in your position who, like you're telling us about where you were at in life. You didn't really have a super clear purpose or vision for your life. And these people seemingly gave you that, and you are trusting them. You felt like they were, this is kind of your group, these are your people. This is your family. And then to realize that the betrayal, the deception that the manipulation, you start to realize I just think it's abusive, it's emotional abuse, and it's understandable why you would have those struggles and why people coming out would be find it such a challenge to trust. And I feel like that kind of makes my position a little bit difficult at times, because I've always wondered that, like, how am I being perceived by former members who are coming on here, and I'm this other religious guy who has just another version of faith, and you guys just came out of this you just came out of this group who was really nice and kind. And so that's always interesting. I don't really have any further thoughts. It's just something I wonder about and want to learn how to not be fake in my kindness, and just to I don't know. I think there's a lot of healing that needs to happen in a lot of you guys, and I just hope I can learn how to help that, and to help you guys realize that they're learn to know that I believe there are, which I think you already know, but there's people out there who I think have a real relationship with a real God who has real love and produces a sincere goodness inside of people. I'm not saying that's in me necessarily. I hope it is, but I've seen that in other people. I've seen a stark contrast between my experiences sitting down in conversations with members of the WMSCOG. And they're nice, they're kind up front, they're respectful mostly. But there's an empty shell that I feel like I can almost perceive inside of that person, where that kindness, it's not coming from a sincere place. And I think it's the same for a lot of Mormons I've had conversations with. It's the same with a lot of Christians professed Christians I've had conversation with. But I've also experienced, as real as the fakeness is, I've experienced something just as real in a sincere person who sincerely loves a real God, and just that. As real as the falseness is, I think there's just as real truth and sincere love and goodness that you can experience in other people. And
I definitely catch your meaning. And I definitely do see the value in what you do in explaining where where in the Bible the WMS misrepresents, gets wrong, or just outright lies about what the Bible actually says. However, at the core of it, I feel like there is a bit more to it than that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there is the control and everything else. And
Yep.
and I mean, it kind of reminds me of another video that you did that was very interesting, impressive, because you were able to get a former member to actually on to dialogue with you. And
right.
I remember it was kind of frustrating to listen to, because when he would say you'd ask him why he believes, and he would say, well, Sabbath, Passover, prophecies, the Bible, and then you're like, okay, well, here's a place in the Bible where it directly contradicts WMS doctrine, and then he would flip to well, I'm all in, I believe in this fully, I know in my heart.
Yeah.
It was I mean, it doesn't sound like, I mean, in for some people, especially people who came from Christian backgrounds, I find more consistently, it is very, very possible to get them out through showing them apologetic mistakes in the WMS doctrine. However, there's some people who have deeper psychological issues or deeper personal issues who are hooked in there because of those things. Like, one of my things was particularly, I didn't come from, like I said, I was kind of having an apathetic existence in college, and then secondly, I also didn't come from a very stable or loving family. So the WMS, at least for a time, satisfied all of those personal needs, and then on top of that, it was like, during that kind of honeymoon phase, had someone came at me with even with solid and reasonable and logical apologetics, it would have been just like, oh, get out of here. It would have been falling on deaf ears, so to speak. But
that's a really good point, and that's why it's just, I feel like I'm painfully aware that the videos I put out where I'm counteracting specific doctrines, I think is kind of what I started out saying in this interview. I'm aware that they can only do so much, and they're only going to be effective for a certain type of person who's in a certain place in his life or in where he's at with this group. I think mostly probably the apologetic style videos that we're putting out are most helpful for members who have already begun to ask their own questions. And it goes back to what you're saying about thinking objectively. If you haven't come to a place within yourself that you've realized, I need to doubt what I believe and my own perceptions, because everybody around me in the world thinks they've got the answers. They think they know what's true. And so who am I to think I have got what is true? So to come to that place where you start to think objectively about, why do I believe this? Is there really good basis for this? And I think unless members have come, at least even begun to step into that way of thinking, probably most of the apologetic style videos we're doing are just going to bounce right off. And it's going to be, that conversation you brought up, that live stream we did, I can't remember what his name was, but that's kind of the frustration that you get into, because you can present all the evidence in the world. You can show clearly that this group, what it is. I mean, you can show clearly from the Bible that, I'm continually appalled by the arguments, the biblical arguments used for Mother God, and the few handful of verses they use, and just how terribly interpreted those scriptures are. But it shows me when a member is convinced that these verses, like Genesis 1 or Revelation, when they believe that those verses actually are trying to communicate that there's a mother God, a female God, that tells me that they're not yet in an objective place of thinking. They haven't stopped to think, okay, is that really what the writer here was trying to convey? Can I really extrapolate that from this one little verse? And you saw that in that conversation in that live stream, that you can present the best arguments, but unless that person is in a place where they're willing to begin to ask honest questions, it's not really going to be effective.
Right. I mean, yeah, and I think another important thing to bring up at this moment is that, along with what you're talking about, is that it's for this reason specifically, to create this effect that you've experienced in interacting with former members, is that they specifically is the information control aspect. And I'm sure other people have said this or have told you this, but specifically is to not even read the Bible, just read the snippets of verses they give you, study their sermons and read their books basically. And because it's basically because like in my personal experience, when I came out, it's weird because when I came out, to an extent, I still believed in it. But I thought I was doomed per se. That I thought I was gonna for sure go to hell. So, but then after that, after probably a period of a year or two, the teachings wore off, and I became exposed to some other thoughts and ideas, and I guess at that point I followed the new atheist movement, and at that point my atheism was just a kind of just a suppression of the WMS doctrine, to say, well, it's all illogical, it's all wrong. But then just probably up until a couple of years ago is when I really started digging deep into philosophy and into actual early church history. And that's when you really dig into it, that's when you can really see some of the errors and holes in their doctrine. And that's when it finally all clicked for me, like finally. For example, like they talk a lot about 325 AD, and how the Passover was abolished. And it's all prophecies in the Bible. And you probably know more about this topic than I do, but my understanding was, on one hand, you can't take the position of sola scriptura and be like, well, we just follow the Bible. But at the same time, my understanding is that the Council of Nicaea is where Scripture was canonized. So you can't. Is that correct?
I believe so. Yeah, I'm a bit ignorant on church history, so actually, you probably know more than I do. But no, I think that's correct. Yeah.
You can't say that. Well, this is good. This is what we follow. But here's the epitome of evil, and that's where we got it from. And then also they make the claim that the Passover was abolished at that time. Well, actually, there was actually a group of a significant, substantial group of Christians that were called the Quatrodecimanians, who kept the Passover at that same appointed time or whatever up until the 8th or 9th century. So if there are still people doing it the same way, they can't make that claim.
Wow.
So it's like but then here's the other problem, is that they talk about I don't know if I can't remember. It was one of the one of the 2012 studies. Was it the 3200 Days and Nights, where they specifically used 325 AD as a point in time of exile, where that will end at 2012 and when the tabernacle is built. But I forget the study. It was one of those top secret studies. I only heard it like once or twice in 4 years. And the thing is, if they use those dates to mathematically calculate when that prophecy is going to be fulfilled, if it wasn't fulfilled at their date, their theorem or calculation gets thrown into the complete whack. So I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. Well, yeah, there's definitely a lot in that. And I think one aspect is just the failed prophecy, which calls into question the entire foundation of their belief system, especially meaning it came from the teaching of Ahnsahnghong himself. And that's something, don't take my word for it. Just go do the research and see what did Ahnsahnghong teach about these. And he certainly did have specific dates of prophecy, end of the world prophecies that didn't happen. That's very problematic. But I think more than that, what I get from what you just said is just that the history, the actual history, when you look at it yourself, when you examine it, not through the lens that they put in front of your face, when you examine it without that lens there, history tells a much different story than what they try to tell you.
A much more nuanced story than what they tell.
Right. So you're telling me, though, and that's something I wanted to ask about. It sounds like you kind of went through a period of atheism. So maybe talk about that again. Like, what was it? What do you feel like was at the core? What was really, when you went there, you kind of mentioned as sort of a way of suppressing stuff. Maybe expound on that a little bit. So you kind of went toward atheism to kind of bury some of the doctrine. Is that right?
Definitely. I don't know. I guess the core fundamentals of my personal philosophy on that, my ontological view, would be that I was thinking, well, and at this time, you have to understand that the atheists I followed at that time, or were familiar with, just gave these really juvenile, like, iterations and regurgitations of David Hume and Bertrand Russell, and the thing is, I was thinking that, well, I can follow this empiricist worldview where I think, okay, well, any claim that can be made true needs to be demonstrable, needs to have proof, and then I could, and then if I couldn't, prove, so to speak, that God exists, then I could just on that basis alone, I can throw out the entire WMS doctrine. I can, I forget about all their crap.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of a simple one-step solution. Kind of a one-step solution to you had all this damaging false doctrine that was harming you emotionally and mentally, and so kind of a simple solution to that was just, well, God doesn't exist, so I don't have to deal with every specific point. I can just throw it all out.
Right, and then how I came out of that, and I basically kind of thought that, well, I could think about Humean empiricism. But if I'm honestly going to say that every single claim needs to be justified the same way, well, I'm lying to myself, because you don't prove that you love someone the same way you prove the boiling temperature of water. So in the same way, it's kind of like after I've come to my way out of that was I guess I started with Kantian transcendentalism, and then I got into Aristotle, and then I basically I guess I came to believe in God not through scripture, but basically through certain transcendental truths, that certain things can be real but at the same time be immaterial. Because if I'm going to demand, because what the materialist, empiricist, atheist worldview boils down to is just that everything has to be proven the same way.
Proven, exactly.
Not proven the same way.
It's not.
And but if you go on that premise, then your worldview becomes just a contradictory, because under that worldview, time and space cannot exist. Because that's pure a priori, if that makes sense.
Yeah, man, that's good stuff. And I think one unfortunate thing I think that's happening with a lot of people impacted by this group, one of the things I want to continue figuring out how in these videos and what we're doing to help this problem that I'm seeing, is this group is coming to people with this perception that they are the Bible. They represent God and the Bible. And then they're chewing them up and spitting them out. And then they're leaving the people with just this complete inability to think about God or the Bible without associating it with all these terrible, terrible things. And that is one of the most frustrating things for somebody like me, who I look at the Bible and my thoughts about who God is, and I'm seeing this entirely different picture than what the WMSCOG has painted, but they're using, it's like, in my mind, it's like they're using our book, and it just seems so unfair and so frustrating. And I think it's just a problem that I want to, and other believers need to continue to learn how to help members who have been damaged by this group see that what their experiences were, what their thoughts are right now about the Bible and about God, are not accurate depictions of what the Bible actually teaches. It's like if I have stomach flu and I, years ago I had stomach flu and I ate chili and ended up this is kind of disturbing and gross, but I threw it all up. And ever since then, I can't look at chili the same way because of that experience. Like I associate chili with throwing up, but that's not really fair to chili. Like chili has nothing to do with throwing up. It was this bug that was inside of my stomach, this other issue. And it just so happened that chili got unfairly thrown into the mix. And so I think people impacted by this group in any way, you have to learn to disassociate the Bible and thoughts about God from this group, because plain and simple, this group does not, its teachings about who Jesus is, about what he taught, are so far removed from what the reality of who he is and who he taught, that there's really no, Jesus is unrecognizable within the WMSCOG. The God of the WMSCOG is just so far removed from what the God of the Bible is that there's no connection there. And I would just hope that people would think objectively about that as it sounds like you have, as you transition out of this group, to think about that, to realize that, I'll say this one last thing that I think is a helpful analogy for me. It's kind of like lottery. If you think about the lottery, if you think about faith in God being like a lottery ticket, the fact that there's fake lottery tickets out there, people might get a fake lottery ticket and they might have all these experiences with it. They might have that fake lottery ticket might provoke actual real experiences of joy and like elation and excitement and all these things. But when you find out it's fake, it could you might then just throw out the whole lottery as a whole and say, well, it's all just a sham. It's all just junk. But the fact that there's fake lottery tickets doesn't change the fact that there's a real lottery ticket out there where those experiences are actually based in reality. They're based in something that's real and true. And so if you've been somebody who's experienced the pain of having a fake lottery ticket, don't throw out the whole lottery system based on that. And now people are going to accuse me of like promoting gambling and all that, which that's not the point, obviously. It's kind of a bad analogy, but I think hopefully it helps in some way. So, well, something else you said that before we end, I want to get into is just you talked about evidence, and so maybe tell me like what was it in your journey in searching this out? You kind of went into atheism. What would you say is kind of like what's some of the major evidences that now have you in a place of faith in God? And I guess for clarity's sake, like your faith, do you hold to Protestant Christianity? What's your views at this point of God?
Well, I believe in God. I believe that Christianity is the truest, is closest to the truth, and particularly, although I'm not officially accepted yet, I believe orthodoxy is the truest expression of Christianity in my worldview. Mm-hmm. But to get the initial question is, I guess the transition is like it goes along with what you were saying about about the negative associations that former members make with the Bible when they start reading and I had that same exact thing when I first came out. When I'd start reading the Bible, I'd be reading and hit Genesis 1:26, and all the negative things from the WMS would just come flooding back, and I put it away. But to get over that, the only way to truly do that is to understand it more, and the way to do that was to understand, I guess, the nature of reality more, and that and yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
No, no, that's good. It's kind of like you have to. I've had multiple experiences with stomach flu and different food, but another one was Chipotle burritos, where, man, I ate a Chipotle burrito once, got food poisoning, and I couldn't eat Chipotle for a long time. But I missed eating Chipotle because I loved it. And so I had to begin to kind of retrain the way I thought about it. And it took some time. It took a couple of years before I could finally eat it again. But I learned to, as I would eat it, to like not let my mind go to where I was like, okay, this is going to make me sick. I'm going to, like to disassociate that burrito with throwing up. Again, this is kind of a gross analogy, but I think it does. This involves you retraining the way you think about it, and it goes into what you're saying about understanding it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So basically, yeah, about evidence, I came to I came to a belief in God through understanding that that the laws of nature exist immaterial, meaning we know time and space are real, yet I can't objectively or physically measure it. At the same time, for instance, like the law of non-contradiction objectively exists. It's not a social construct. It exists across cultures, everywhere, no matter whether we call it the law of non-contradiction or precision schmonks. It's the same thing.
It's the same.
So anywhere where you see this constants or structures or systems in the universe, in reality, we can always infer that a mind or creator exists behind that. So I guess I went from being an atheist to a rationalist deist to an Orthodox catechumen. So through my personal study of Scripture and the church history and the early church fathers and how their writings actually parallel perfectly a lot of the metaphysics of Aristotle, and Thomas Aquinas was one that had a huge influence on me as well.
So you've done your study.
If that answers your question, I kind of got lost. That absolutely does. And man, I've got so much of that stuff inside me that I'm just kind of dying to make entire videos devoted to that kind of subject, because as I say this, I've said this multiple times, I think, in different videos, but like I'm somebody, I have an analytical mind where I just I have a hard time trusting thing. I think probably the older I get, the more difficult it is to trust the things I've always believed. So being somebody who was raised as a Christian, especially being involved in this sort of work, it's easy to begin to look at around the world and see so many different groups and people who are so convinced that they have the truth that that has increasingly made me look inward and see why am I convinced that I'm not just one of them? Why am I convinced that I stand out amongst all these other peoples and religious ideas and religious thoughts and sects, that I think I'm belong to the one group that has the truth? And so that's something that I have to continually wrestle with my own faith. And ultimately for me, it comes down to why do I wake up every day and devote my life, which I continue to do? Why do I devote my life to a Jewish man, Jesus of Nazareth, who lived 2,000 years ago, and I can't see him, I can't look at him, I can't hear him, I can't touch him physically. And so I have to ask myself that. And so, but what you're touching on here is one of the, honestly, is I would say probably one of the top 3 reasons why I can't move away from belief in God. Like I just can't do it. I couldn't come to that point and continue to wake up every day in this reality I'm in, because of the very things you're saying. And I think a lot of what something else that would play into that is just the existence of moral absolutes, of objective moral truths, of moral values that are globally embraced and acknowledged as either more valuable or less valuable, as either good or bad. And me as a husband and a father, again, as somebody who has to think objectively, and I can't help but be analytical, I have to ask, why am I being faithful? Why be faithful to this one woman? Why attempt to be a good father? Like, yes, there's maybe social benefits to them, but is there anything more than that? Is faithfulness to my wife, is that even something that exists? Or is it just this man-made social construct that ultimately has no
no ultimate value or meaning or truth to it. It's just this idea that you can either choose to live by or not, and there's no ultimate difference between the two. And to me, you're talking about the laws, these laws that govern the universe. I see that in my reality. I see those, and I have to do something with that. Like you're saying, these aren't physical, but they're there, and they're, I think, undisputed. And the same goes, I think, for moral truths and moral values. I as an individual, I can't think of a basis to, like, an ultimate foundation for why I would choose day after day to be a moral man, a faithful man. There's not an ultimate basis. I'm not saying there's not any reason at all. There's value to it in itself, but I can't think of an ultimate basis to do these things unless there's a God who goes beyond this, there's a God who gives these things ultimate meaning and significance and objective value.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Because under the atheist worldview, it ultimately boils down to materialism and all that stuff under that worldview, all that stuff you were just talking about, morals, faithfulness, reason, basically, all that, none of that stuff can exist. And we all just become a bunch of, protons and electrons and quarks and gluons banging onto each other. And,
right.
Just a mass of atoms with spitting up more atoms. So,
yes.
I think we definitely think we're on the same page with that.
Yeah. That's good. And I think what I can continually come back to is I feel like I would have to be dishonest and sort of close my eyes to the reality I see in front of me if I were to embrace a naturalistic view of the world like that, because I can't ignore these invisible realities that I see, the invisible reality of moral truth, of the things you're talking about, these laws, these constructs that govern, laws of logic, things like that ultimately I think have, how can you claim that these things exist and that they can be imposed on every individual universally, regardless of location or time or culture? How can you claim that they exist and that they should be imposed universally without saying that they exist and they're universal, they're objective, and there's something that's giving them that sort of value? So I guess with that being said, I guess the question that I have for you that maybe we can kind of begin to wrap this up is, why do you think people leaving this group should at least continue to consider the idea of God? And maybe, like, what would be some encouragement or some thoughts that you would give to maybe push people to not just immediately throw it out and, embrace something like atheism? Because I think a lot of people just probably do that as sort of a knee-jerk almost response to the experience of this group. So do you have any thoughts that you would want to give people in that regard?
Well, I think before they can think about, I have this kind of this is this constructivist saying that in order to know what is true, we have to know what is not true. So in the same way, I guess the ultimate objective of pursuing these things, be it whatever your religion is or this or that, is to get to truth. I don't believe that somebody could be a Christian and not care about what's true and what's not true. However, this if someone were to just come out of the WMS, I would encourage them. I mean, in most cases, it's gonna be a long journey, as it was for me, like 7 years ago. I would simply tell them to seek truth for themselves, not the WMS truth, but but any and all information. Have them understand what does it mean to scrutinize something, question everything. If something is true, it will stand to scrutiny. And so since they just came out of the WMS, obviously they have this bad experience. They might have some kind of trauma or PTSD or whatnot. I would simply encourage them to honestly go back into the WMS studies, not physically go there, but into their books, into the Bible and whatnot. But only this time, don't simply do it under the lens of critical thinking, meaning look at other academic sources on scripture. If they say if they remember, if the WMS said this represents this in scripture, get a Hebrew and Greek lexicon and look it up yourself. I mean, my thing would be to dig into it. Like one of the things that came to mind is one of their studies is is God who came from the East or something, and that's where they pinpoint Korea as the place where Jesus would come back from a second time. And one of the scriptures they showed in Isaiah was from the ends of the earth. And in the original Greek, the word at ends of the earth was I believe arets, if I'm probably butchering that, but that doesn't mean a location. It actually means a time, meaning the end of the world is when the second coming of Christ will come, not so long, so not in 1948 or whatever they're trying to say. And that's just one example. However, I would just encourage them to, before they do anything, before they adopt any worldview, I wouldn't want them to follow me or follow what some person says. I would encourage them to become a thinker above all else, become an independent, rational thinker. And then in that pursuit of truth, I believe they'll find what's true.
That's good. Yeah, that makes me think of Proverbs 18:17, where it says, "In a lawsuit, the first to speak seems right until someone comes forward and cross-examines." And so, of course, if you're reading these passages like Genesis 1 and Revelation 22, and you don't have any other prior experience with the Bible, prior thoughts or understanding of what these say, and you're just hearing this one side of the story, you're just hearing the WMSCOG perspective and interpretation of these things, well, of course that's going to seem right. If you're not willing to listen to other interpretations, but go and listen to other views of it, look into the actual language, question the way that they're utilizing words like Elohim, and is it really trying to say what the WMSCOG says it says? Even just go look at like old Jewish rabbinical, if that's the right word, thought about places like Genesis. Ask the question, why haven't the Jews and why has Israel and the rabbis and the teachings that have come forth from them never landed on a concept of there being two separate gods? These are the ones to whom the Old Testament was given and entrusted. These are the ones who wrote down, originally it was Jewish men who wrote down these words, Elohim. Why was it that they never reached the conclusion that there was both a mother and a father? And so just hear the other side of the story, because if you don't, of course what they're saying is going to seem right.
Yeah, and they should also ask themselves, why exactly does the WMS analogize outside information to spiritual poison?
Right.
That's and let me clarify something I said. I didn't mean that they should physically go back to the WMS. I meant they should examine what. At least I didn't want.
No, I understood that was what you're saying, but yeah, probably good to clarify. Yeah. No, I think it's just critical thinking. Think critically, ask questions. And I can assure you, you've been taught that the WMSCOG has a monopoly on deep, profound biblical interpretation and understanding. And that is just, there's no simple way, there's no nice way. It's just a crock of crap is what it is. I mean, it's just baloney.
All of their teachings were from other sects and groups, the Seventh-day Adventists.
There are, I believe, 100% better ways of interpreting these passages, like Genesis 1, like Revelation, and like the prophecies, the supposed prophecies of Ahnsahnghong. If you really dig into these things and think objectively, step outside, take these glasses off that the WMSCOG has by fear of manipulation forced you to wear whenever you look at the Bible, I just hope and pray that you would learn to take those off and then to view the Bible, to look at the Bible, to look at God, to think about these things apart from those lenses. And I'm confident that when you do, like Brian, you're going to find that one, their teachings are baloney. And I think two, you're going to find that there's still very, very good reason to hold to faith in God and belief that these scriptures, the Bible, has something significant to say to us as human beings.
I would agree.